Yeah, this is Classical Guitar Archives, Part 3. This is a piece by Federico Cimaravilla and published by Unión Musical Española in the late 1920s, I believe. I've had Bandurria methods by him that I worked with way back in the 1980s. This sold for 4 pesetas. Let's see, this belonged to Augusto Marcelino. He acquired this particular book in 1949. And this was published in 1930 as Sevillanas, Malagueña, Petanera, Alegrías, Tango, and Guajira. All well-known flamenco styles. This is a Carmelo Rizzuti set of arrangements. This is the Cost 25 Studios Superiores, Opus 38, 38, for guitar. It's a 4th edition. Rizzuti taught for over 50 years in Buenos Aires, and this was published in 1956. So this is a couple decades before this he had it available in his first edition of that. Here's an interesting piece. We have Julio Martinez Oyanguren, virtuoso from Durazno, Uruguay. And he played at the White House for Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1936. Probably a bunch of people watching this video, the youngsters that don't even know who Roosevelt was. Not to be confused with Teddy Roosevelt, who actually went up San Juan Hill about, 1904 in the Spanish-American War. I could be off on the date of that. This was published by the Vicente Tatay Company in New York. And this is a version of Ay 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 and Sweet Lilani. This was published in 1938. Martinez Oyanguren, Julio stayed in the United States till about 1941-42. And he did a lot of transcriptions, had some original pieces as well. Did recordings for Decca, RCA. He did his first recordings for the Jota and the Un Momento by Juan Elias in 1931. That particular recording's in the 1932 Victor catalog that I have from Buenos Aires. But he was recording for Decca in the 1930s. My colleague Armando Garcia from Hialeah, Florida, he told me years ago that Alberto and Rolando Valdez Blaine, from the Cubans who settled in New York, were page turners when Julio Martinez Oyanguren was doing radio shows in New York. And there's some photos of them, the two Valdez Blaine brothers, in an early BMG magazine from the early 1940s. This is a Carlo Munier Italian publication. Carlo Munier died about a century ago, I think 1911, something like that. And this is his Tempo di Valzer. This is written for guitar. 6 Composizioni Originali per Chitarra. He was a mandolinist who also played guitar and did transcriptions. One of my students, I took him completely through one of the books of Carlo Munier for mandolin. Very advantageous stuff to learn how to play in all different keys, all different positions. Here's an early Leonard Schultz composition published in London. I think most of his stuff was published on the continent itself, but this is Journal des Guitaristes, arranged for the guitar, melodies. And this is a Bohemian Polka. I got another one here, is Lucy Neal and Buffalo Gals. Buffalo Gals is a song I teach in the Mel Bay book that I've taught 600-700 people with for the last 35 years to teach reading skills, and they can go to any style of music, be it classical, flamenco, rock and roll, jazz, anything pretty much, but we get the reading skills established. I've had 1,200 people study with me in the last 35 years. Taught 12 instruments in English, 7 in Spanish, and 2 in Japanese. And I may be able to teach in Mandarin in another year. We'll see. Depends on my skills. Taught mandolin and guitar in Japanese. And here's a piece published in Paris, 1936 it was published, by Editions P. Naudin on Faubourg Saint-Martin. I think that's the street that Lecoq had his shop on a century before this was published. And this is École Moderne de la Guitare, a modern school for the guitar, toccata, etude of repeated notes. So this is a tremolo piece, as we will see here, written by Julien Rousseau. My pronunciation of that is not real good. Published 1936. Here we have a more modern piece by Eduardo Caliendo, Orientale, Danza Numero Uno, by Farfisa, the company that made Luigi Mozzani guitars, I believe, the plastic ones, etc. And also had the Farfisa organs that were popular in the 1960s, used by American groups. I remember I was in a rock band at that time, and we had somebody that played a Farfisa organ, circa 1966. Back in the days when I was a bass player and I was in a band called the Beefeaters, we were an opening act for the British rock star Ian Whitcomb, who had You Really Turn Me On. And this is dated from 1961. Another piece, Alonzo Mudara, very well-known composer for Renaissance music. It's Romanesca No. 2 from 1546. Transcription by Giuliano Ballestera. Published by Bourbon. This was sold at Casa America in Buenos Aires. And this was published in 1969. We have a piece published in England by Schott and Company. John Runge arranged this, 3 17th century airs. Once again, 1957, this is from the archive of Jose Augusto Marcelino, the great collector and student of the guitar. His collection was shown at the 1958 first exposition of the guitar in Buenos Aires. He had a great sheet music collection. Matanya Rafi, as I mentioned in one of my previous episodes, he bought 90% of the collection a couple decades before I got mine. I got 10% of the archive, about 800 pieces. Here's a piece by Angel Barrios, not to be confused with Agustin Barrios. Angel Barrios was a composer for flamenco as well as classical pieces. And this is Melodías de España para Guitarra, album number 3, published by Ediciones Musicales Madrid. Same publisher for the piece by Nina Ricardo that I talked about a while ago. This is from 1958. Here we have one of the famous Romanza Sin Palabras, Romance Without Words, Opus number 13, Opus 38 by Mendelssohn, transcription for guitar by Eduardo M. Reboredo. Propiedad del Autor, he published it himself. And this was printed by the same people by Breyer Hermanos in Buenos Aires. They published their own sheet music. They also did printing for people such as this gentleman here. Here's an interesting piece of sheet music. I put out a book, about a decade or so ago, Colección de Piezas para Guitarra. And at that time I wasn't aware that Jose Costa was also known as Giuseppe Costa, and that these pieces had actually been published in Italy. I think I had American editions, something like that. And so this is 6 pieces for the guitar. Sei Pezzi per Città di Giuseppe Costa, published by Ricordi, printed in Italy. This was sold by Ricordi Americana in Calle Florida in Buenos Aires, published in Milan. Here we have a Girolamo Frescobaldi Toccata per Spinatina sola over liuto. Trascrizione per citata revisione e digitatura de Ruggero Chiesa. Ruggero Chiesa was a great contributor to the guitar. He did a lot of transcriptions. At this point, I think you can probably find some books that have been printed out there that have documented the work that he did. This is published by Zerboni in Milan in 1968. Let's take a break.